Transit. Oh. Transit access in Tucson to me essentially means I am essentially able to be in Tucson. I am able to get groceries. I take the Route 8 from where I live to the Walmart and Elcon Mall, or I walk to Empire Market, which is on 9th Street. Means I have more options of where I can live. I'm not simply limited to just like if there were no buses in Tucson and I still wanted to go to the U of A, I would have to bring a car. There's just not a place where I could walk to class, walk to get groceries, walk to potential employment centers. That's just not really feasible. And if I have a car, I have to start worrying about insurance, gas. Does the apartment have a parking lot? Where do I park? It would be cost prohibitive for me to essentially be in this city. To me, it's transit is just, it allows me to access things that I depend on a daily basis, like not just Route 8 to get groceries. I've taken routes 25 to like every couple months to pick up medications. When like my computer breaks and I need to go get it fixed, I take 16 on Oracle to go to the Tucson Mall. I'm not a business owner, but as a college student, I've often been more on the other side of the cash register. Without transit, without the streetcar, I wouldn't be patronizing as many businesses in Tucson as I do. That's just a fact. If the streetcar and the buses didn't run where they went, I wouldn't be going around spending my money supporting local coffee shops, local restaurants. It allows me to be a part of this community.
So another thing, I just wanted to add my own personal experience here. So I went to high school with Laehn right over there. And back in those days, the only reason I was able to go to a nicer high school and have a job and things like that was because my schools paid for my transit. Otherwise, I would have been stuck going to the high school that I could walk to, probably would not have been able to be employed. And that's just a very, it's a harsh reality that a lot of poor and lower socioeconomic classes face in these days, is that without free or low-cost transit, you're just stuck.
Great, so I want to dig into that a little bit more, and you've touched on this a bit, but the next question is about really drilling into that business or economic impact. And so either from your experiences as business owners, business operators, or people who are looking at their career options ahead, from your own experience or from things you hear from others, how is transit important for supporting your business? We've heard some of the employee perspectives, but maybe we could expand a little bit into that kind of larger economic impact.
Somebody got something right off the bat.
So as I mentioned, as a business owner, being able to hire people who don't have a car is really important. It's important for me, just from my own perspective. Before I owned Revolutionary Grounds, I was a social worker in my past life. And one of the requirements was always has your own car, which really struck me as a problem then. It is not a requirement here. You just have to be able to get to work. And being able to hire people and not ask them whether or not they have a car makes a big difference. And being able to hire people who may have disabilities and knowing that they can get to work because they can ride the bus makes a big difference. And so as a business owner, it's really important. And also, for when we have events, when people ask me, well, how do I get there, what bus line it is on, I can tell them what bus line it's on so that they know that they can come to the events. And that is also pretty important from a business standpoint. And, you know, my kid is 15 and looking for a job right now, and they're going to ride the bus. So, yeah.
going to take this a slightly different direction. So I work in the insurance industry, and I'm heavily tied in with small business and real estate in Tucson. And the availability of public transport, it makes such a huge difference on the daily cost associated with living. So an easy example, the cost to own a car averages out to $1,000 a month. If you were to take that $1,000 a month and just put it back in everybody's pockets, not only is that going to stimulate the economy, but it allows people to have an extra $1,000 to buy a house or to move themselves in a direction where they're not just trapped under a depreciating liability. So there's, I mean, it's a huge potential to stimulate the economy and help Tucson boom by not throwing all of this money away.
For me, as someone who has done job searches and internship searches, I can say, like, the first thing that I have looked for is, every time I've looked at an in-person job, I've looked, is this close to a bus line? Like, whether it's in Tucson or whether I'm applying to like a summer internship in Chicago or San Francisco or DC, like, my first question, it was always look up the address. Could I reach it by a subway, by bus? If not, immediately out. Doesn't make sense for me to like rent a car for a summer internship. And same here in Tucson. When I was like looking at places to apply, I constantly searched, how long does it take me to get there by bus? Is it even accessible? If it wasn't within like Tucson city limits, if it was out in Marana, that was just out of the question. Because at that point, I really just couldn't rely on transit to get me there. So talked to several people who have worked, especially service jobs or at distribution centers, and they say that, like, especially for younger people working, transit is a very much a lifeline to get jobs they otherwise wouldn't be able to. I know friends who have worked at distribution centers, like they've done like the overnight shifts, and they said, like, yeah, my parents work 9 to 5s. They can't be driving me at night. Like, they're sleeping during these times. If the buses weren't running this, I wouldn't be able to get this income. I know people who, like, in service industry in Tucson who also attend college and say, like, yeah, without the transit to get me to campus, to home, to my job, I just wouldn't be able to do that.
So a follow-up question to that, and this is taking us maybe a little bit off script, but inspired by your comment there, your response, do you think that were transit to either not improve here in Tucson or sort of plateau or even get worse as far as service cuts and those sorts of things, do you think from your experiences Tucson is potentially missing out on people, especially younger generations that are deciding they don't want to be as tied to a car? So people who might, maybe they're coming up through the U of A and looking around and deciding, this isn't, I'd rather go to a place that is better serving those needs, and we might lose out on them in our community.
I believe we would. Were service to be cut back, I believe that you would see a lot of students say that, like, yeah, I'm less likely to consider, like, staying in Tucson long term. If you kind of think about what are stereotypically cities where younger people out of college tend to move to, those tend in the U.S. those tend to be ones with high access to public transit. And while some of this is like the employment side and where employers are, some of this is, a lot of people are just like, I don't want to be stuck owning a car for the rest of my life. I don't want to be stuck being forced to drive. I want to be able to live in places where I can take a bus to work, I can walk to a neighborhood grocery store, I can feel safe biking, I can feel safe walking. Like, people, to the extent that they're able to control those, do consider those things when they want to move somewhere, and it makes sense. These are meaningful quality of life and also economic things. As you said, a car is $1,000 a month. If people are trying to find ways that they can ditch that expense so that they can save money for everything else that they need to spend on in life, that's an important factor.
There's also something to add to that is there are, when transit isn't accessible or available to everybody, there are people that simply cannot move to a car-dependent city. I have a 4-year-old son with autism, and there's a very good chance that someday he's not going to be able to drive. And so if he's stuck in a city where it's car or nothing, his option is nothing, and he has to go somewhere else. So it's important to look at this for ADA community as well. This isn't even a negotiable for some people.
I'm going to go back to both as a business owner and having people who live here that want to work in a coffee shop bookstore. It's not the best paying job. Transit is important, and having access to transit is important, and cars are expensive. And having people that want to work in a leftist coffee shop bookstore, these are often people who are interested in infrastructure or having less of a footprint as far as carbon emissions and those things, and having access to transit is important for that. It really makes a big difference. And as my kids are growing and looking at college and those things, actually one of my kids may have narcolepsy and might not ever be able to drive. So looking at places where they can be and they can get around makes a difference. And just for me, I like walking. And cities that have buses are a little bit, Tucson is not that great of a walkable city. The areas that have better transit are also more walkable.
All right, so changing direction slightly, a colleague of mine at the U of A, and this was a question from the organizer, so I'm not just trumpeting my colleague's work, but recently released a study that's showing between 2014 and 2021, the streetcar corridor in Tucson accounted for about half of the city's population and housing growth. And even though it lost, 0.8 million in waived streetcar fees, the net fiscal gain was 1.5 million in tax revenue, an increase of about 188%. So hearing that, and I know we've been talking a lot about, we've talked a little bit about the streetcar, but we've also talked a lot about bus transit. So moving sort of specifically to that study about the streetcar, what do you think when you hear that? What does that mean to you as business owners, as members of this community? And yeah.
So for myself personally, I've lived in Tucson my entire life, and I absolutely love Tucson. I love the community here. I love the people here. And hearing that such a seemingly small change can spur that much economic growth and that much growth population-wise, housing growth, all of those things, that means that Tucson is getting bigger and better and having better socioeconomic opportunities for everyone. So to me, that's it's super, super important that we push that so that in 20 years we have an even better version of the city that I already love.
We were on 4th Avenue when they were building the streetcar. It almost killed us. It was really rough. But having the streetcar was great. It also meant that the people that own the buildings thought they should charge more rent, and that was rough. And maybe they are, and that's good for the tax base. But if we had things like the streetcar in other areas of Tucson, that would be even better. In areas that have higher traffic as well, where people are more dependent on transit. If they went down La 12, if they went down South 6, that would be fantastic. I would love it if we had light transit that went down Broadway. I know we were fighting for that. I don't know how long ago that was. I would love to see that happen. I think that would make a huge difference for Tucson.
Yeah, so when I hear those numbers, what I think is that it it kind of confirms something that's almost like self-evident. Like the value of a transit system is making it easier for people to move around and to access things. So it's like, there's all this discussion about fares and the cost of keeping fares free, but, the point of a transit system is not to make everyone swipe cards or put coins into a box. The point of a transit system is making it as easy and as accessible for as many people to get to the places they need to be. So when I hear that, it's what it says to me is more people have been able to access things that they otherwise wouldn't be if the streetcar were not there. And just anecdotally, I do know people who have said yeah, I use the streetcar to get to the library in downtown. I know people in classes who have said that students who said the reason they went to Tucson Meet Yourself was because they could get there by streetcar and they didn't have to walk. I can speaking for myself, I've used it to go to so maybe somewhat embarrassingly, I've stumbled into Brooklyn Pizza past midnight on several occasions with using the streetcar, and so there's some sales tax revenue that has definitely been made there.
Yeah, great points. And I think you've started to answer some of these follow-up questions in terms of the cautions and some of the downsides of the success of higher property values, higher rents. And I think that is one of the reasons that places that have continued to expand their streetcar or light rail or bus rapid transit networks, you're expanding that system so that the benefit is not as concentrated, is not as scarce, which can help to alleviate some of those. So that leads into a follow-up question. Sort of what do you see about the future of, would you like to see expansion, particularly of rail or other forms of high-capacity transit like bus rapid transit?
So we were just discussing some of those numbers about housing costs and prices and stuff like that going up in areas that are around the light rail system. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that here in Tucson, it's such a small service area that it's become like a novelty or commodity. When you decommoditize it and everybody has, when it's no longer a commodity and everybody has access to it, and it's at that point, hopefully it wouldn't drive up the prices of housing all the way across the entire city. But even if it does, the financial offset of everybody having that extra, or people having the opportunity to have this extra money, the extra tax stimulus, things like that, my hope is that would be enough to offset potential rising costs and things like that.
Transit doesn't exist in a vacuum, and housing doesn't exist in a vacuum. We have some unfortunate lack of protection for housing for people in Arizona. We have some unfortunate issues where people can come from out of state, buy properties, flip them, raise the rent by 300%. That's legal here. That's a problem. Fixing transit isn't going to fix that. Spreading transit out will be great for a lot of communities, but it might lead to some more of that speculation. That is a systemic problem that can be addressed. But it has to be addressed at a state level, and it's a related fight, but it's a different fight. It's a really important fight. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't expand the transit. It means we need to be aware of what might happen and work with impacted communities. Those are the same communities that are riding the bus. Will be the same communities that are going to have their rent go up by $300 a month and not be able to afford it. And yet still, I would like to see it expanded. I honestly, I live on Broadway. It would suck to have them tear up the street for a year, but then we would have transit. And that would be awesome. I grew up in New York City. I didn't even learn how to drive till I was in my 20s. I rode the bus and the subway everywhere. I would love to be able to do that here. Maybe as a business owner it would be a little harder. I actually carted several cases of plant milks here this afternoon. I couldn't have ridden the bus with that, but I could ride the bus pretty often. And my kids could ride the bus, and my employees could ride the bus, and my friends could ride the bus, and we'd actually have buses. So, keeping that in mind, there's an impact, but that impact is part of a systemic disregard for people who don't own the buildings. And that is something that has to be addressed at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that's very important, is that when we talk about the benefits and downsides of like possible transit expansions, is that, yeah, how transit impacts a community and a city is dependent on the broader society around it. There are a lot of things that need to change systemically, both more beyond the city level to address some of these things. What I think that the streetcar example can tell us is that, look, if we reasonably expect there's going to be more tax revenue coming in once it's finished, I think it makes sense that the city, if it were to expand, higher capacity transit to more areas, it could say we're going to put up more of an upfront cost to maybe help local businesses in the area, so that while the street's being torn up, it's not just they're just not, to offset some of the costs of losing customers temporarily, because be a higher upfront cost to give a lot of those small businesses money, but we understand that once the transit line opens, there's going to be more people coming through here, and so it will pay itself off in the long run, and it will have the benefit of those, those local stores and local vendors are able to be the ones that can still benefit from that.
Just say there's laws here in Arizona that can't actually give businesses money. So when they were building the streetcar, we gave us business consultants. And I still use a lot of the support that I got from the business consultants because I'm a social worker and I don't know anything about business. And that was great. One guy told me I should open a hookah lounge. Obviously I didn't. But that was helpful. And having that support will help businesses and help offset the fear that businesses will have. Because, all of us small business owners are always a disaster away from not being a small business owner anymore. Like all of us are a disaster away from being in massive medical debt. That's a reality that impacts people. But that would make a huge difference. And knowing that hopefully could help businesses get behind expanding transit.
And Joy, I'm glad you made the point about housing being a critical component of all this. When I'm talking to transportation audiences around the country, I almost always include a set of slides that's 4 photographs. It's photographs of an amazing urban transit, bicycle, walking paradise in Copenhagen, in Amsterdam, in Vancouver, British Columbia. And then I throw in wherever I am, might be at Portland, great picture. And I ask the audience, what's the biggest difference here from a transportation equity perspective? And they all shout, oh, it's something about the train, it's something about the bike lane. And I say, no, it's the building just beyond the frame. Because in Amsterdam, in Copenhagen, up to 50% of their housing is somehow controlled in price. It's either public housing, or there's some restriction on the increase in price on a regular basis. And so I always say, we can't just import the transportation ideas from Copenhagen and Amsterdam without looking at that broader context, because that's where we run into problems with rampant economic displacement, because we've improved the transportation system, to your point, increasing accessibility. We know that is going to increase the value of being in that location. And if we don't have these systems in place, that's going to price a lot of people out. So let's move on, unless anybody wants to say something to that. So what do you see as the biggest problem currently with our transit system here in Tucson, either from a personal or from a business perspective?
So this is, I'll share a personal experience here. Is reliability could be improved upon, and then just service hours. I had a conversation with him about how, or there. Oh, sorry, I keep doing that. I'm sorry, guys. So service hours and reliability. I had a personal experience. I was 17, closed down my first job at 1 a.m, and I missed the last bus home. And that type of issue could be resolved by simply extending another hour or two to target the people that are not necessarily a 9-to-5 commuter. Because not everybody works a 9-to-5 job, and that's kind of what our transit system is built around largely right now, is normal working hours. But there are not just like people that attend bars, there's bartenders that would need to get home at 3-4 in the morning and need a reliable way to get home. And then there's safety aspects that go into that as well, but largely just making it more accessible, more reliable, and something that you don't need to worry about if it's not going to show up.
Yeah, I think I can second that. For all the benefits that the transit system here has brought to me, the biggest criticism I've always had is frequency and service hours. There have been times where I've just been stuck waiting, beyond 30 minutes for a bus that, on paper it says it will arrive eventually, hopefully by the end of the day, but, who knows. But yeah, it's sorry. Yeah. There's also, I can't speak to this myself, but I do also know people who work in bars and have said that, like, yeah, if the streetcar or the bus just ran an hour, 30 minutes a little bit earlier or a little bit later, I would use it to get back or to get to work or to get home for the opening or closing shift. But they're just like, but since it doesn't, they're forced to take a car there and take it back, even though for one of those trips, it is possible to use it by transit.
So I've already said that I've had to take people home when we actually close a little bit earlier, in part because historically many of the people who work here use public transit. But I've had to take people home, throw the kid in the car, pick them up, take them home. That kind of sucks. I'm fortunate I have a car. I live really close by, and my kid loves going out at night. That's great, but it's not great on a regular basis. So hours and routes. Another thing really is something that we haven't talked about, which is safety on the bus. Safety not in terms of having cops on the bus, which from my perspective doesn't make you safe, but my kid's been accosted on the bus several times. When I was a young woman, I was accosted on the bus. Now I'm over 50 and invisible, which is great for me, but not so great for all the young women who get accosted on the bus. And that's an issue. But again, that is a broader societal issue. I think having maybe some sort of policy to address that from the transit point of view would be great, as long as that policy isn't we're just going to throw cops on the bus.
Also, another thing to consider with both the safety and with the reliability and frequency of travel is how safe is it to sit out in the middle of July in the hot sun when you're waiting for a bus for an hour. I've had my own experiences with that. I've had experiences with getting caught in a microburst, waiting for a bus, things like that, where like environmentally, Tucson's not a hospitable place. And so some improvements could be made for bus stops to be more safe to sit in, like shading or enclosures or things like that. And lights, yeah, that's a big one.
Great, wonderful answers. And of course, we all know this from my experience as a transit planner, I'm well aware of this, improvements in service, improvements in routes, increased holistic safety approaches. These are things that cost money. I would say that fare-free transit is one of those improvements to transit that costs money. So I just hope we're going to have some big decisions coming up about transportation funding in the next year. So pay attention to those conversations because that is one of the ways that some of these conversations can turn into reality. Okay, so for the last official question I have here, I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction, so I hope I don't throw you in a loop, because you started to touch on the answer of sort of what would you like to see changed in the next 20 years. But I want to take that one step further and say, let's think big. 20 years from now, 20 years is a relatively long time. We could have a very different transit reality in Tucson. So not just thinking about maybe incremental change, but what would your dream vision be for transit in Tucson 20 years from now?
So when I think forward 20 years, I think about my son and what the world is going to look like for him in 20 years. And 20 years from now, he's going to potentially be coming fresh out of college. I'm sorry. So, I mean, my son's going to be 24 in 20 years. And so to him, he's going to be a young person getting out into the world. And what is that going to look like for him? So my hope would be that he doesn't face a lot of the struggles that I faced currently or within the last 10 years or so of my life, such as like economic opportunities due to lack of transportation or not being able to go to college or things like that due to lack of transportation. So my dream for him is to be in a world where he can hop on a rail or something like that and go from breakfast to work to college to whatever it is that he wants to do without fear of, one, with the safety issues that we were talking about, but two, without the fear of having to be late to work or miss an appointment or things like that. So that, for me, that'd be my dream. But
I would love to see light rail spread throughout Tucson in 20 years. A light rail system with buses that go from the light rail out to the other areas of Tucson. So if they just did one on Grant and one on Broadway or whatever, that there'd be buses that go back and forth, and the buses that go from there south and north, or buses that go east and west, so that there's actually a full system. You know, if you picture a transit system from a larger city like New York or DC or Chicago, well, I don't know about Chicago so much, where you have all those multicolored lines that are going throughout everywhere, the subway system in New York is connected to a bus system, so that when the last stop ends, there's buses that go from there much further. And having that would be amazing. And then if you have multiple options, like if you have a light rail, that's going to go faster than a bus, you know, so you can get places without it taking quite so much time, and then you can step from that to your bus to get to your house or get to the grocery store. And buying groceries is kind of a big deal in this town. Sometimes you have to go pretty far to get to a grocery store, and maybe the grocery store you can get to is not that affordable. I grew up in an area that didn't have grocery stores. We had little bodegas, and they had they sold Lucy cigarettes and beer and canned goods, and they had little carts with really wrinkly apples on them. And we had to ride the bus kind of far to get to a grocery store and then cart all that stuff on the bus back home. Having access to transit, and that's what I'd see in 20 years. Light rail everywhere, buses from there, connecting people to the places they need to go, well-lit areas to wait for the bus, shade structures at the bus stop. That's what I see at every single stop. Not like here and there, really cute with purple cactuses, but like actual shade everywhere.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with everything you guys have said. You know, in 20 years, I'd be very sad if the transit experience of Tucson is still, hey, you bought your bag of groceries, now wait 30 minutes to get on a bus that's overcrowded and there's no street lights and you can't find a seat and it feels rough because, you know, you're standing with bags of groceries waiting, trying to get home. You know, in 20 years, I'd hope that we'd learn that, you know, that we learn from the streetcar and that service creates success. Investments and improvements to transit gain riders. And when people are able to move about, get to the places they need, that is the value of transit. So I guess more beyond, like, of course, I'd love it if there was a subway on Broadway. I might volunteer to build that myself. But, you know, beyond that, I hope that in 20 years we understand that as a city and as a community, transit isn't just like a thing that a city has. It is an integral part in how a city functions. And hopefully we understand by then that we need to be working with it holistically to move our city in a better direction.
Great. I really appreciate those responses, and I think it's very important to be aspirational and to think about what could be possible. And I think that that's something we've perhaps been lacking. I know when the original discussions were happening around the streetcar, there was discussion about it just being the beginning of an expansion of streetcars, potentially up Campbell, potentially out Broadway. There's some discussion now around bus rapid transit. But I think that we've lost some of that vision, some of that creativity, some of that aspirational approach. And I think that is something for even a fraction of what you all are talking about is going to need to change. And I think that's an amazing role for this group, this coalition, to be pushing for. So I think that's going to be really important. So with that, I don't know what time it is. I don't know how much time we have. But I know we wanted to have a little bit of interaction with the audience. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do that. I think, do we have a mic to go out to the people?
We'll be online, just not here, so they'll speak up. But
Okay, sounds good. Because we could also have people come up here, I suppose. If
come up. Yeah.
Cool. Would anyone like to be brave and ask a question to the panel? Cliff? Okay, great. Oh. And if you could just introduce yourself briefly.
My name is Cliff. One thing I've noticed from when the buses weren't free, from when they're now that they're free, is that the buses were always running late, especially busy buses, because it would take forever for everybody to pay their fare, and the buses are a lot quicker now, and it's a lot more convenient.
So I think, yeah, Cliff made a comment about how fare-free transit has improved the efficiency of the transit system, and I think the question of the panelists kind of is like, have you guys seen this? Like, is transit operating more efficiently since then?
Back in the days when I rode the bus regularly, I absolutely did see that. There are people fumbling for change and dollar bills and stuff like that back when, I don't know, well, obviously not as transit free, or it's free transit now. But the system was rough, and especially with something I noticed a lot because I was in high school at the time was that there'd be a flood of 20, 30 high school students that none of us knew what the hell we were doing. And so things like that do slow down the efficiency of operation.
I can't speak to how it was when fares were free. Luckily, by the time I got or before fares were free, luckily by the time I got here, for me, they had already implemented fare free. But as someone who's like, when people talk about reinstating fares, I don't think they understand the actual experience of a transit user on those busy routes. Like, do you watch people get on a busy bus route that goes by any of like a major chain grocery store? Do you seriously expect these people carrying bags of milk and eggs to like, oh yes, let me free up a hand so I can find those 5 quarters in my wallet? All like the half sober college students on 4th Avenue at like 1 a.m. Yeah, it's like, that's putting it politely, but it's like, oh yeah, there's 50 of them stumbling out of a bar. Like, yes, let's wait until every single one of them taps their card and before the train can go. No, that's ridiculous. Like, that is so like. The point of if we're saying that the point of transit is to make it so people can get around faster and easier, then we got to think about time as being part of the cost. So if we're slowing it down so that everyone can pay the fare, we're probably losing a lot more value.
Also, when they put in the streetcar at 4th Avenue, there were only certain places you could buy a ticket, and you couldn't pay with cash. It was such a pain. Even as somebody who worked on 4th Avenue all the time, I didn't necessarily, the first couple of times I was like, what the hell am I supposed to do? Where do I get this pass? It was, I don't know if it wasn't well thought out from a user standpoint. And I don't know what they would do once they reinstate fares in terms of, if they go cashless, that's going to screw around a lot of people, or that you can only get your passes at these specific locations, but there's no sign at the bus stop to tell you where those locations are. That could be a problem. So right now, yeah, great.
And to add to that, if you can only get the pass at specific locations, but you're there to ride the bus to those locations, it's a little bit counterintuitive there.
Great. Just bringing back fares doesn't make sense. It's been 5 years now, right? It's a ridiculous idea. Is there any other questions from the audience? Anyone? Christopher? I keep introducing people before they come to the mic. If you could briefly introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Christopher, and I guess like a general question is what has like anyone against this or any sort of opposition said about this so far, or like what's their like perspective in terms of just, pretty much just the gist of that.
Just to clarify, against fare-free transit, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So something that I've actually experienced firsthand, I grew up in a household that was very anti-public transit, very, very anti this link when it was created. And so I heard a lot of if you haven't heard it called that, the slink is the name for the light rail system. So one of the argument that I would hear from that side a lot was, I just completely blanked. So there was an argument made that having no fare makes the bus ride less safe because it attracts people who are less safe, which is obviously very classist and very there's some real issues with that argument societally. But essentially what I have seen firsthand is a smear campaign against public transportation, where they say they'll put out an article that says there have been this many percentage of an increase of incidents on the bus ride, and they make it sound really dramatic, and then it's like a 1 in 100 something. I'm sorry, guys, but it'll be an increase to like a 1 in 100 incidents per day or something. Like, it's this ridiculous smear campaign where they try to make it sound unsafe and that it's promoting people that shouldn't be traveling to travel. But the reality is that, like, everybody should have the right to move around in the city that they live in.
The biggest arguments I've heard, you may be surprised to learn this, but most of the small business owners that I interact with don't share my politics.
Crazy.
I know. So they are very much class-based arguments. It costs too much money. This is my tax dollars. I don't want my tax dollars going to a bunch of kids and homeless people riding the bus. Very much tax-based. There's a lot of ignorance around people from people who don't ride the bus about who rides the bus. A lot of assumptions if you're not a person who rides the bus about who rides the bus. And the longer we go with free fares, the more that people can blame the problems on transit on free fares, as opposed to on how transit is done or on the systemic situation that we live in. So most of the arguments that I hear are really, they're either very much class-based, as you said, or they're based on a lack of understanding of what the problems we have with transit are. So that the assumption is it's because it's free, as opposed to, because, I mean, the people paying $1.50 for a bus ride is not actually gonna cover the cost of the bus. So, and I mean, I could be wrong, I'm guessing. They're not gonna cover the infrastructure cost of transit by having people pay $1.50 or $2, or however much they're gonna decide it's gonna be. It is a funding issue that's not gonna be fixed by having people pay a fare as much as by making sure you're allotting enough funding. And our tax money that we pay, more of it goes to other things than goes to the bus. To tax breaks, to tax incentives for business owners, to tax incentives for a new mall to be built, not necessarily to the bus. And then, you know, the safety issue, and again, as a woman, as a mother of girls, the safety issue is really important. However, that's not an issue that's caused by free transit, but because free transit is what's in front of people, that's what they want to blame it on. That's an issue that's caused by our whole incredibly violent, misogynistic, transphobic, you name it, society. That's something that needs to be addressed separately.
Yeah, and I think this touches on a point that people are blaming free buses for issues that exist throughout a society. You know, you can't separate a transit system from the societal context in which it exists. And the idea that people are proposing is that in a society where every week there is tragically another mass shooting, putting fare scanner machines on buses is going to stop violence. I find this argument to be flawed. I mean, yeah, and so to that point, yeah, I don't think that that's going to prevent anything, and I don't understand the logic of, okay, so we're going to put a fare scanner machines on the bus, and this is going to make people stop crime from happening at the bus stops, where people are waiting before the bus arrives. Not sure how that happens. Not sure how that works. You know, to the question of like funding and taxes, and like, yeah. So like there's not a single transit system in the United States where the fares cover the cost of infrastructure or the cost of service. That's just true. And, you know, people harp on about this. It's like, oh my goodness, like, you know, look at all this money. Like, I don't even use the train. I don't even use the bus. Look at all the money that's going into it. Let's take a step back. The gas tax does not cover nearly the cost of roads and car infrastructure in the United States. Like, think about, if you add up all the money that Amtrak has gotten over its history, it's less than like 5 or 10% than 1 year of just federal funding for the interstate highway system. So when people talk about like, you know, subsidies and transportation, like, are we really like, I don't think it's fair to like ignore the cost of like how much money is being poured into endless highway expansions, and that, you know, even when like they try to like not use tax dollars, are still very costly. Like the idea that car infrastructure breaks even either is just not true. Like you look at Oklahoma and Texas where they have so many toll roads because aversion to public spending. All of those toll roads, like none of them have ever broken even. None of them have paid off the cost of the highway. Like a lot of them have gone bankrupt and had to be bailed out essentially. So if we're talking about costs of infrastructure and subsidies, like it's insane to hyper focus on transit and buses and trains when the vast amount of money that is being spent is on the most environmentally destructive, like least efficient, most expensive per person moved form of transportation. That like there's a reason why out of every developed country we have the most traffic and pedestrian deaths.
Just want to put one more thing out there. When you really boil down the arguments made against free-for-all transit, it just comes to a form of selfish otherism, where I mean, people who are so self-centered that they want to save their $3 in taxes or whatever it happens to come out to a year, rather than allow economic growth and opportunity for everybody in the country. It's a disease in our society that needs to be addressed. As it's part of the conversation, it's its own conversation as well, but that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, so it sounds like the panel, it's kind of said that transit, the safety issue on public transit is one of the big arguments against fare free transit right now, and that the problems, the violence, or all the things we see associated with transit are larger societal issues that aren't going to be solved by bringing back fares. I have a quick follow-up question that I think will help draw a little bit of nuance here. So yes, we know that there is definitely a scare campaign around free transit right now, but we've lost the faith of bus drivers, and specifically the unionized bus drivers, the Teamsters Local 104 here in town. My question kind of is, how do we get their support back and change things? Because to have a transit system that feels safe, we need employees that are taken care of and feel comfortable at their jobs, right? So that's my question: is how do we win back those bus drivers?
I've got.
You got one? So, all power to the union. The question then is, what are the bus drivers seeing? The bus drivers are experiencing the same violence that the rest of us are experiencing, but don't have the same buffers that we have when we're in our cars. So, addressing the buffer that we have that we're in our cars. This area has a high transit population. There was just somebody in here with their pants not quite on that stole a pastry on the way out. I think it's a cheap price to pay that they took a pastry to have them not fall asleep with their pants off in rep grounds, right? But I have to deal with that. And my people that have businesses around here have to deal with that as well. And we deal with it more than the person sitting in their apartment deals with it, because people come in and out all the time. It's a public place. I know that it's a larger societal issue and trying to address it from that point of view, but it is also exhausting. So I imagine as a bus driver dealing day in, day out with people who are high, with people that are hallucinating, with people that are angry at the world, and you're there, that is a real serious issue. It needs to be addressed seriously and not just put off. And I think having realistic conversations with bus drivers is really important. It's almost the same conversation where I have teachers tell me, well, I want cops in the school to keep me safe because there's guns in school. Guess what? Studies show that cops in school don't make you safer. But why don't we address the fact that school isn't safe and there's guns in school? So let's address the fact that the bus drivers are actually dealing with these very real issues. And you know, if the thing that's in front of them is free fares, then that's what they're gonna go after. But let's address it realistically and have an open conversation about what will actually work. And then maybe get the union on our side. Because also if then we just bring up fares and ridership drops, then union drivers are gonna lose their jobs too. So let's address it as pro-union and as pro-people, as allies, as opposed to us versus them. That's my 20 cents.
So a potential workaround, and obviously it costs money, but everything we're talking about right now costs money. Having access to like social workers on buses and things like that is something that could potentially help, where it's not an armed security officer with an ego issue that might kill a rider. We can have somebody that can help with people that are, you know, having a mental episode, or people that are, like she said, high or on drugs or things like that. But also, when we address the underlying issues of like mental health and drug abuse, socioeconomic factors power that. When we address those socioeconomic factors and we make well-paying jobs available to everyone, it helps with quality of life, which then helps with things like substance abuse and mental health issues and things like that. So the problem, I'm sorry, guys. So it becomes a problem that is able to solve itself. We just need to show people that this problem can solve itself.
Anything?
You don't have to say.
Yeah.
You don't
Do you want to weigh in? Yeah, okay, thank you guys. Were there some more questions, I think?
Kind of related to what you're talking about now, we had a question on the live stream of, do you guys think the homeless population issue should be addressed in order for a better transportation system? So kind of you're touching on it already, but how does addressing homelessness help us make the transportation system better?
I'm just going to basically reiterate what I just said, which is it's a problem that solves itself. The homeless issue it's not a homeless issue. It's an issue of rising housing costs and inaccessible job opportunities and inaccessible cost of living and things like that. Bringing in public transit that works for everybody and gives everybody a more equal footing than what was present before can solve those issues, and make it so like I'm looping back to the $1,000 a month cost associated with owning a car. If you take that $1,000 a month away, that right there is a housing payment for a lot of people. But that is a barrier because if you can't afford to get to a job, you can't have the job to afford to get to the job, and it becomes a cyclical issue.
If the only air-conditioned place in a city where it's 110 degrees out is the bus, people are going to ride the bus. And they're going to ride it all damn day. And if it's free, they're going to ride it all damn day for free. And if it costs $1.50, they're going to ride it all damn day for $1.50. So yes, having more transit, better transit is not going to make homeless issues better. Having it not be free isn't going to make it better either. But actually having places with air conditioning where people can be without having to either sit through a prayer meeting or get rid of their dog or prove that they're not high, that will make it better on transit. That's all I got.
Yeah, I think this just goes back to the point that, when we talk about these issues, a transit system is reflective of the society around it. The reason why there's a conversation around unhoused people on public transit is not separate from why are there unhoused people in general. We can't separate them. That doesn't make sense. So, if we're talking about what will solve it here, instead of just saying, oh, let's push unhoused people off buses and, where to ever else and then ignore the problem, I think those resources are much more humanely and much more responsibly spent on addressing the issues of housing costs themselves. You know, as a co-lead at Tucson for Everyone, I believe very strongly that, costs of housing is one of the biggest detriments to not just individuals, but to a city and society as a whole. So there's, longer, more big-term changes will require changes beyond the city, more structural, just like Arizona law preempts a lot of things that would be useful, like reasonable rent control, inclusionary zoning. But even within the city, there are some things we can move on here, increasing social services to prevent, if we can't, if we can't directly guarantee housing, we can at least guarantee shelter to, like you said with the AC, people are going to ride the bus in July because what's the reasonable alternative here, right? So I think it's just worth emphasizing that the solution to this is the solution to housing in general, which is expansion, in my opinion, expansion of primarily non-commodified forms of housing. If we had the funds and had the ability to just put up a bunch of, public housing anywhere we wanted and just essentially give it out to people, I think that would solve a lot of it pretty quickly. But that is my opinion.
All right, great. We have time for one more question. And then I'll give you guys some marching orders.
Okay. One thing, there's a lot of themes I've heard, one of which is all of you know a lot of people who really rely on transit, and you understand how big the need is. And yet, as Joy pointed out, there's a disconnect. Small business owners thinking these are only certain people. You're aware of how many of your customers use transit. I would submit that a lot of small business owners are not aware of how many of theirs. So I guess my question is, how do we make ourselves more visible? How do we make it more obvious in the community, the car-dominated community, that there are so many of us? And I think that one reason this is hard is because bus riders are so busy getting around. But again, how do we lift our voices and make it more obvious to the powers that be that this is not a fringe need, this is a super basic thing that we're all depending on?
Great question.
I personally, I think a big thing is doing things like this, bringing visibility, however it happens to be, through the internet and through, I posted 3 different times that I'm going to be here, knowing that other Tucson business owners are going to see that, and kind of hoping that somebody's going to listen in and see what the perspectives we're discussing here are, so that we can kind of bridge some of that disconnect.
Sometimes the loudest voices get the most attention. If the loudest voices are the people pissed off because somebody was high and yelling at them on the bus, then that's what you're going to see. But if folks who are interested in expanding transit, the other day I saw on Instagram somebody posted their story of riding the bus, and they rode the bus to the mall, and they rode the bus to the grocery store, and they rode the bus home. And hey, look, here I am on the bus where nobody's accosted me. And here I am on the bus where it's actually really clean. And it was a really nice little story, and I watched the whole story. I was really impressed. But I think if we have more of that, because there are also the angry people, and with reason being angry, I got to ride this bus to get to work, and I do not want this guy to scream in my face while I'm riding the bus to get to work about whatever they're hallucinating about, or, trying to sell me stuff I don't want. Or, in the case of my kid, trying to get my phone number the whole time I'm on the bus. We can have those stories too, but if we're also telling the stories of the people that just depend on the bus every day and ride the bus to their favorite coffee shop bookstore, then we can, the more of that we have, the more we normalize it, and the more it gets out there, then the more people can see that this is just a normal part of everyday life.
Yeah, I think really the point here is that, how do we overcome what are the loudest voices, especially considering transit users tend to be people who are working, who are busy. It's things like this, outreach, having people both share their stories of using public transit. That is both good, and, stories about how they depend on it, but also sort of building more so like maybe more like organizational, more collective sort of structure, so that when, city planning conversations are happening and it's like 10 a.m. on a Tuesday and they're like, oh, let's have a city town hall on what the future of the buses are. It's like when all those loudest voices come in to say, oh, let's just get rid of the buses entirely, we can have people, who maybe they can't be there in person, maybe through our organizational outreach and online outreach rate, we got them to sign on to a petition, and their name can be there for someone to present to say, hey, look, there's people who aren't in this room, who use the bus, who depend on it, and like their voices matter too. And here's like a list of them. Here are some of their experiences. I think like, just again, like in a car-centric city, making the most out of every like transit user's voice by organizing it and making it more collective to show that we all have the shared interest is the path forward here.
Great. So some marching orders, because time is running out for tonight. Again, thank you folks for coming out. What the Transit for All Coalition needs you to do as soon as possible is to call your city council member and tell them that you ride the bus, you support free transit, that you think bringing back fares is not going to solve anything. So call your council member, call all the council members, leave them voicemails, write them emails, and also ask 2 other people to do the same. 2 other bus riders, 2 other people who depend on our transit system. Because again, we got to break that stereotype, and the way we do that is by continuing to harass the people who have the power. The other thing to do this weekend, come out to Cyclovia. It's kind of a magical thing. The streets shut down, and you don't have to look both ways before you cross. It's kind of surreal. So come out to Cyclovia. That's at, where's like the main park for Cyclovia this weekend? Just, the LSA folks aren't here, but like where are the booths going to be? What's Cyclovia.org. You can check there. Sorry, I don't remember the park name off the top of my head. In the 05, yep. Yeah, so come out, experience that. There's going to be food. There's going to be a lot of interesting organizations tabling out there, and it is really a vision of what a different city could look like for a day. Oh, and please, in the back, sign up so you're on our mailing list so you get more information about the Transit for All Coalition, the fight for fair, free transit, and expanding it. It's far from over. We're just beginning. Do we have a date and schedule for that? Oh. Oh, yeah, so you hear about the next forum. Sorry. I thought you were telling me. Gene, you didn't read the memo. Okay. Yeah, come out to the next forum and bring a friend with you. Yeah. Thank you guys again for coming out. Thanks for our panel. Round of applause for them, please. Great.